All right. We are about to get underway here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is Govenda's monthly webinar series, and today we are going to be talking about how to maximize the effectiveness of your board's committees. So we're glad to see all of you here. And we're going to be introducing our guests in just a moment. Next slide, please. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you again for being here. We are very excited for what we've got today and hope that you'll get a lot out of this webinar presentation. My name is Margot Alquist, and I am the Senior Content Marketing Manager here at Govenda, and I will be hosting and moderating today's webinar. And we are very excited to have our guest today, Ralph Ward, who is author and publisher of The Boardroom Insider. And Ralph is really going to be talking about lots of great things and how to make committees run better. And we're excited to get into that. Before we jump into the presentation here, let's just go over some quick housekeeping. So by default, all of you are on mute so that there aren't any interruptions to the presentation, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you. We absolutely do. So please, throughout the presentation, share any questions, any comments that you might have, and please use the Zoom Q&A for questions. And then any comments or anything else, feel free to drop it in the chat. We will then take time once the presentation's concluded to make sure that we get answers to all of your questions. So we will have that at the end of the presentation. And then after this webinar is complete, the Govenda team will be sending you an email with links to the slide deck, as well as to this on-demand video. So take a peek out for that, and that will be coming later today, tomorrow. All right. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest, Ralph. So Ralph Ward is an internationally recognized speaker, writer, and advisor on the role of boards of directors, how to benchmark how boards excel, setting personal boardroom goals, and very importantly, the future of governance worldwide. Ralph is a publisher of the online newsletter Boardroom Insider, which is a worldwide source for practical, firsthand advice on better boards and directors. And the newsletter can be found online at boardroominsider.com, as well as on the newsletter's LinkedIn page. Ralph also edits the Corporate Board magazine, which is the nation's leading corporate governance journal. As you can see by the slide here, he is also the author of 6 books. And he gives, he's the author of 6 books, and he has appeared in many, many media outlets, including TheStreet.com, CNN, C-SPAN, Voice of America, Bloomberg, National Public Radio, Marketplace, CNBC, and many more. Additionally, he writes and comments on boardroom matters for publications including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Across the Board Cranes, Vital Speeches, Detroit Free Press, and many, many more. He also serves on advisory and nonprofit boards. So without further ado, please welcome Ralph Ward. Ralph, thank you. And you can go ahead and take your part of the presentation away.
Thank you, Margot. And I wanted to thank Margot and the folks at Govenda for helping or inviting me to kick off their series here on board and governance issues. I was really excited when she reached out to me because I thought, yes, they get this. They know how to make governance better, and they also provide the online and digital tools that make it so important. That's going to tie into some of the things we're talking about today because of the way board portals, online meetings are radically shaking up how boards and committees operate. So there are some wonderful synergies we're going to be discussing today. And they start off at a fundamental level of the board, one that doesn't get as much attention as it should. And that is the role of board committees and how you can transform your own committees into such a pivotal part of what the board does. As I said, committees are not getting the amount of attention that they deserve. And that's a shame because at the functional level, that's where the action is nowadays in corporate governance within the boardroom. This is a slow moving, but it's a foundational shift away from work at the full board level to more and more functional hands-on action going on at the committee level. It's something radical that we're seeing, but the committee level has become the real engine driving the board of directors. Boards have been given or had dumped on them in some cases ever more tactical roles and tasks over the past couple of decades. Most of this is procedural sort of things, busy work items, compliance, disclosure, dealing with a lot more regulation, with financials, compensation, legal demands, filing, so on. This is something that's tricky for boards. They have had to go from amateur pastime for the business leaders who make up most independent directors in America and around the world to become an ever more professionalized group. And this has meant reshaping the structure for oversight. They've had to go from being a large group of generalists in the boardroom into separate committees that are able to craft processes, structures, and leadership for better monitoring and fulfillment on specific tasks. Audit committees, compensation, risk, nominating governance, all of these other panels are actually digging in at a functional level that only company managers were dealing with just a couple of years ago. And that creates a problem from the very beginning. This is a quote from Mark Nadler, name some of you may be familiar with. He was with Spencer Stuart for years, went out on his own as a business consultant. And this is from a recent corporate board article he wrote for us a few years back. It's a very fitting comment, and it sums up the problem with boards overall. I'm not going to repeat the things that you've learned in MBA or business school programs. The modern board of directors, as we know it, traces its roots back like 300, maybe even 400 years ago to the launch of joint stock limited liability companies. You would have a group of squires, if you will, in England gathering together to build a factory or to build a ship or to charter a bank or whatever, reach into their little pokes, put a few sovereigns on the table, and they could make a good profit if it succeeded, but if it failed, excuse me, they were only out their initial investment. That was the limit of liability. They kept a close watch on operations, obviously, but that was the origins of the board of directors. They'd gather around a table, which was nicknamed a board, and we've had that terminology come down to us over the centuries to today. The board of directors evolved over the years as you had stock ownership get widely dispersed beyond the squires, hundreds, thousands, millions around the world, found out that this limited liability corporate model was great. But obviously, you're not going to run a democracy like that when it comes to dividing policy or setting dividends or such. So you have all of these shareholders electing members of the board to serve as their fiduciaries and their representatives, especially in the US, but in all developed countries up until early in the last century or the end of the last century. Most of the board members were company insiders, founders, top managers, emeritus people. They were insiders running the company. The board meeting was pretty much just a legality to put a cherry on top of whatever they had decided as managers. Last few decades, that's shifted. There's been a lot more demand for independent directors who aren't members of management, who aren't affiliated with the organization. And that works very well. It's given us some excellent independence of judgment, avoided corruption. But again, you have people who are typically corporate leaders in their own right having to come in, deal with an organization on a few hours a month basis, manage to keep track of it, monitor it, cover for everything, and they're not really up to the task. The whole structure is not designed for that. So committees are the tool that are being used to professionalize that oversight. We'll talk about how that happens. Let's start out by making sure we have our terminology right here. This is a general outline of a typical board structure. It's from a corporation in Australia, and there's obviously a lot of variation. But this gives you some idea of what you're dealing with. I put this here for you to give you some idea of the power that you really need to bear in mind. The shareholders are at the very top and center for a good reason. They are the ghost in the machine. They elect the board of directors. They give the board its legitimacy. That is what that serves as their proxy for running things. They in turn hire management, which technically is at the bottom of the stack here. And as we can see here, the board, in order to do its job, has had to spin off various entities to specialize in work. Audit committee, which we see here, which in most legal jurisdictions, technically at least, hires and fires the outside audit firm. Compensation committee, governance and nominating committees, any other of those here, they are all bodies of the board of directors, which, as you can see, is right at the center of the pyramid, and they have to increasingly work well as a tactical body nowadays. Here are some reasons why. The shift to committees has happened for several key reasons. There is more tactical board work required nowadays. The level of approvals on things like disclosures, of compensation, of legal filings, of all of the things that a company has to be in compliance with nowadays, increasingly is signed off by the corporation with tough legal penalties for it. You have to get up to your elbows in making sure all of the I's are dotted, all of the oversight has been done, all of the verifications has been done. Who signs off on that? Well, management does, but also the board of directors. If you're serving on a board and your name is at the bottom of a filing, and that's going to be questioned by a legislator or a lawyer or a regulator down the road, you want to make sure it's done right in the first place. So that makes it a lot more tactical that you have to dig in just to protect yourself. Higher workloads. You're all business people. You all deal with the way corporations, large organizations do things. How do you get so much work done and do it well? You have to break it down into smaller chunks. You specialize in it. That allows more work to be done, better things to be done. You can specialize tasks. Instead of a board full of generalists, you can have designated members who know audit and finance. You can have designated members who know risk. You can have designated members who are keeping track of how pay setting is handled. It's much more efficient. Increased legal oversight and penalties. I touched on this earlier when we're talking about more tactical board work. Board members are online for everything nowadays. We have a whole section here on available that we won't be able to cover on dealing with directors and officers and legal liabilities and how to avoid them now. But board members increasingly find themselves in court having to give testimony, having to swear to how well they attended to things 5-10 years ago, buried in paperwork somewhere now. Someone in government or on an opposition bar of attorneys is going to be digging through your board work. And that means that you want a committee that's being very attentive at doing it well. Specialization of tasks. You can put people with finance in charge of looking at the financial matters, the audit, and other things. You can dig into legal issues of risk. Corporate governance, how are we dealing with that? You can have a committee that specializes in it. All of these things are driving the push to making committees the real muscle behind a board of directors nowadays. The most common types, we're going to get into this later, but this is a general introductory. The big three, I call them, started out. First is the audit committee. We looked at them a minute ago here. Responsible for supervising the outside audit of the company's financials, hiring the outside audit firm, internal audit as well, oversee reporting and disclosure. We're going to get into more detail on that, but they take on a lot of duties, which is something I'm going to mention in a minute here. Infamous audit committee bloat, with them being given too many jobs and too little resources to do them. Remuneration or compensation committee in British Commonwealth countries, it's typically called remuneration. In the US, compensation, but it's a committee that sets chief executive pay, the comp policies and goals for the top executive team, and for the board itself. All other things being equal, it's good to be on a board of directors. It's one of the few jobs where you get to set your own pay. They work with outside consultants and advisors on peer groups, proper pay levels, putting together pay plans, which have become incredibly complicated at public corporations nowadays, and usually look at the risks generated by that pay. Nominating and governance committee. We're going to spend some time on this because it's the newest of the big three, or I should say the most evolved. In charge of vetting, reviewing candidates to serve on the board itself. They put together the slate of directors that is sent out for shareholder approval. And that was basically what they did for years. It's grown enormously since then to a lot of more duties. It's become kind of the kitchen sink of the boardroom. Everything gets thrown onto it nowadays. And sometimes it's even responsible for investor relations. Some of the other popular committees you're going to see. Finance. This is very common at, obviously, financial institutions, banks, trusts, large nonprofits, anything that has to do with review and strategic planning for big capital spending, transactions, and investments. This allows you to specialize. Risk or Compliance Committee, a hot new gaining committee here, monitors risk issues facing the company, regulatory, legal, operational, compliance, all of the things that go with that. It's a huge mandate. And it is common, again, with financial institutions, but it is growing popular with all sorts of boards. An executive committee of the board. Probably you've heard of this or have some experience. It originally started as a kind of subset board within the board, usually the chair of the board, chief executive, maybe one or two other members who were able to get together and make decisions on quick notice when there was an emergency or something had to be done in a hurry, and it simply wasn't practical to convene the full board. It's fallen a little bit out of grace over the decades. Obviously, it sort of goes against the whole point of having a board of directors, but it's still not uncommon here. We saw a little bit of a revival with it a few years ago with the COVID crisis, when it was difficult to get full boards together to make some pretty big decisions. But again, committees are a very valuable and useful tool. There are a lot of other things that can be done with them. Ad hoc, temporary, specialized committees are popular. A tech committee. This is something that we have seen quite popularly. I have some research from the S&P 500 by Ernst & Young, found technology committees have actually edged ahead of risk committees in popularity. As I said, at the S&P 500, it's found at 12% of firms. Typically technology firms, as you can imagine, but financials, other ones like healthcare and hospitals, which deal with a lot of confidential data. Essentially, if you have big data exposures and big dangers, you're more likely to have a tech committee. And since every committee or every company pretty much is a technology company nowadays, it's becoming a lot more common. Strategic planning committee will be seen at organizations with long-term planning issues and needs that come in there. Designated strategic planning committee is sometimes seen, often it's actually the full board and put together on an ad hoc basis once a year for a review of the strategic plan, often at a board retreat or such. And an event committee or something else like that might be for a special one-off occasion. There are several other temporary, specialized, or ad hoc committees that I'd like you to be aware of. One I've seen growing in popularity is an environmental social governance, ESG committee of the board, common at larger corporates, those with heavy government involvements, lots of consumer exposure. They need to make sure their ESG cards are all in order. It's something that was very hot a couple of years ago. It's cooled off a little, but in Europe and in Asia, an ESG dedicated committee of the board is still common. In the UK, 54% of FTSE 100 companies now have an ESG committee. It's hard to find exact numbers on it because the name used for the committee varies a lot company to company, but it seems to have leveled off a little bit. And one last committee I will mention to you just in passing and hope you never have to find out more about it is a dedicated board investigation committee. If the auditor brings a serious misstatement or lapse to your attention, if a government regulator or prosecutor knocks on your door, you receive a Wells letter, there's some sort of suspicion of fraud, of sexual harassment at the top levels of the company, then the board has to convene and decide what is the worst damage. Is this company threatening? What do we know and how do we find out about it? In those cases, a board might have to form an ad hoc investigation committee of independent directors to look into it. I won't go into much detail on it because it's a very specialized lawyerly thing. And like I say, I hope you'll never have to know about it, but put it in the back of your mind as a potential issue when it comes to committees. But all of this comes together to give you an idea of how valuable and versatile committees are at the board level. You can make them permanent, you can make them temporary, you can make them advisory, but they're a great way to specialize and find out information that the board wants to know about and do research and make assurances that the board has to know about. This gives you a little bit of information on how popular they've been lately. Here are some numbers from the S&P 500. As it shows, the big three are called the big three committees for a reason. They're the hottest and biggest. They're sort of the grandfather committees of the board of directors. All of them are out there in various levels. All valuable information here. As you can see, executive committees have fallen off a little bit in popularity. Others have risen depending on what demands are out there. And also some numbers here to the broader Russell 3000 index. Give you a bit of an idea of what's going on. The numbers tend to be the same. The larger the capitalization of a company, the more public it is, the more likely they are to have a larger and bigger committee structure and more formal. The smaller, younger startup venture firms, fewer, maybe just the big three, but they have the ability to form an ad hoc committee if they want to look at something like an acquisition or make a change in compensation or a major stock float, something like that. It's a flexible tool. I'm trying to tell you there are a lot of ways you can make better use of it here. Here are some of the committee trends that we've been seeing over the last few years here. Dig into these. As you can see, very valuable. I would like you to take a special look at the last two numbers here because they relate so much to what we're dealing with going in here today. More committees becoming and committee meetings because some are virtual, lack of concurrent meetings, so directors can drift between them. The usual way of doing things 50 years ago was to have a group on this committee, group of directors on that committee, and they would all do their work and then come back to the full board. useful, but it also didn't allow you to have members go between committees from this one to that one. So we're seeing less use of everyone meeting at the same time with all of the committees and having some float. This is why it's important, the work that Govenda is doing, the tools that they have, the overall use of board portals and online meetings. They have really shaken up committee meetings in some great ways and in some fantastic ways that we're not even thinking about yet. We're allowing more committee meetings, but also quicker, faster committee meetings on the spot. You have seen this. Board committees used to meet after or before the full board. Everyone would trudge in every few months for the committee meeting. Now you can do it by sending everyone a text message saying, having quick online meeting of this or that committee. Get together for 15 minutes, look over information, make a decision, move on, back to business. This is incredible, and we're still working out ways to use it, but I'm seeing it as sort of like Moore's law, except for boards and their committees. I think Moore's law is the rule that computing power is going to steadily increase and its cost is going to steadily drop over time. What we've seen with electronic tools and board committees is the opportunity cost, the time, the effort and expense of getting all of these one percenters together suddenly drops by 90-odd%. You can get them all online. You can do it all electronically. So then you start thinking, what could we do that we're not doing with committees now that becomes so cheap and easy to do it? We can have a lot more but quick 15-minute meetings. We can swing committees off from each other. Want an ad hoc committee? You can put one together, meet, and pull it apart in half an hour. Think of all of the things you can do with these new digital tools when it comes to board committee use, and you'll be amazed. Again, this is sort of like AI for boards. We're right at the beginning of something that's coming. So that's some of the big blue sky information here. Let's dig in a little bit more to committee structures, how they're actually putting this to work, how they're going to function. Let's start with the audit committee. This is sort of the grandfather committee of boards of directors. They started to become popular 50 or so years ago. There were a number of accounting scandals and frauds in business. Regulators around the world, stock exchanges started mandating that public companies needed to have a dedicated group within the board to look at the financials of the organization. And that caught on from being a best practice to being a requirement. And now it has reached down to become virtually universal with any corporation. You need to have an audit committee. Worldwide, most of the standards we've come to expect of board committees overall: independence, some level of topic expertise, tactical targeted agendas. They first showed up at the audit committee level and they set the template. But you're not going to be able to get this done right without a good thought out charter of the committee. We don't have time and space to go through a lot of links of charters. But one thing that I want to mention here is the value of building a good committee charter for audit, but of all of your charters, covering things like this, laying out a shopping list of what it does. This committee handles financial reporting, all of the things that you can see here, filings, accounting policies, making judgments on liquidity, going forward abilities, the major estimates, non-financials, KPI and other, and typically it handles a lot of looking at ESG issues. Risk is something that has become housed in the audit committee primarily over the last couple of decades. I have been in this business for 30 odd years, and 20 years ago, before the millennium, risk was something that boards looked at as yeah, how are we doing on risk? Fine. Okay, move on to the next item. When we had the financial scares and meltdowns in 2008, suddenly boards got very religious about risk oversight, and they had to find somewhere to handle it. Audit committees typically took it on, and their own committee processes, charters, and agendas. All of these things are important in going in here. Some of the details of what the audit committee needs. Leadership is important. One rule that is a universal worldwide is that someone on the audit committee should, in fact, in most jurisdictions, is mandated to be a qualified financial expert. And that's defined in various ways, but for shorthanding it, it's typically been something like a current or retired CFO or current retired accounting firm partner, someone who definitely knows their numbers. That's expanded over time. Best practice now is to have everyone on the audit committee with some variation of real provable finance expertise, something you can go out to the shareholders, put in the annual report and say, see, these people know what they're doing and they're qualified to do it. But being able to lead on this is important. The chair has to have the skill. The chair also has to be a very good manager on it. This chart is from PwC, notes the skills, but also the qualities that are required here. I'll drop in something to mention here is that as we have developed the committee structure for corporations, we're making a beginning, especially in audit, and laying out, this is what your chair needs to know from a technical standpoint. We haven't done much yet on saying, what do they actually know to lead a board committee effectively, to manage the work, to allot it, to drive to a good agenda, to manage a meeting, to have the confidence to have agreed on integrity from everyone, to be able to communicate well with the finance staff. One of the test measures I have is, does your audit committee chair have the home cell phone number of the CFO, and would both of them be comfortable calling each other the night before a committee meeting with a question? If not, why not? These are the things that go into that, but it's a very pivotal role. Calendar is something else that's crucially important. More than most other committees, audit is calendar driven. It's based on your accounting, annual reporting year, filing deadlines, all of the other schedules that are involved here. This is just one sample from First National Financial Management in Canada. Breaks down major annual budgeting and quarterly needs for audit and all of the other committees. I tell people that for your committees, when it comes to setting a calendar, most of the work has already been done for you. Yes, you have your audit budget year, financial filing year, your proxy filing year, but for pay setting, you also have your annual incentive year, pay plan review year. All of your committees have outside schedules that they're set up to meet. So most of what they need to know and when they need to get together to view it is already there. I encourage people on all boards, not just at the committee, but at the full board level, to get these plans for a calendar down on paper, make sure that it's distributed, especially in the board portals and in all of the electronic information. Your board members are incredibly busy, overcommitted people. They're very tightly scheduled. They live on their schedules. You want to get on their Outlook planner well in advance, and you want them to know where you expect them to be, what you need them doing, as well and far into 2025 right now as you possibly can. You always have the ability to add ad hoc meetings and quick meetings as you need to, but get on their planners. That's a good practice that I'll drop in as some advice. Next of the big three, compensation, remuneration committee. Crafting, monitoring, and defending the pay of company executives has grown a lot more complex and a lot more controversial over the past few decades. And it's also become a lot more visible. A good comp committee will spell out these demands in detail. Here again is a quick summary of what's expected and what goes into comp plans nowadays. Executive compensation oversight certainly is important. Looking at performance evaluation, incentive plan management, coming up with an overall compensation philosophy for the organization is required now. Yes, this is the pay that we have set for the CEO. These are the medians. This is the structure that we've set for executive below the CEO level. Why is it that? What are we trying to incent? What messages do we want to send? And how are we communicating those to shareholders? This committee, and specifically the chair of the committee, has to stand up for that nowadays. The disclosure, compensation committee pay, and the notoriety involved here. You have seen many cases in the news of CEO giveaway pay plans that were outrageous. This is also the committee that's often in charge of looking at things like clawback policies and other enforcement mechanisms, a whole other issue to be dealt with. How are you dealing with that? Do you have a plan in advance if you have an accounting restatement and have to pull back some of the incentives you gave your top executives? What is that plan? How does it function? Who enforces it? Those are some of the things the committee has to wrestle with nowadays. And that also means that you want someone in charge who can handle it. Take skill, take some diplomacy. One of the things that has surprised me over the years, 20 years ago, as I said, we started to see the requirement that audit committee chairs have provable finance expertise. I have been waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes to comp committees since then, to require the chair of the committee to have some provable pay setting expertise. And that hasn't happened, but it is sort of happening on a de facto basis here. Someone in HR, someone with comp consulting experience, certainly someone at a top executive level who knows how executive pay plans are structured. Increasingly, you need someone like that as the chair of this committee. Because not only do they have to put this pay plan together, but they're having to defend it to the full board, to the shareholders, sometimes with large public companies or public entities, especially to the wider public. Why are we paying this? What are these incentives doing? What are the dangers in these incentives? Are we really getting what we pay for? So it requires some expertise from a leader. And again, too often there's no real training on that. Agenda, breaking it down a little bit closer here. This is a sample, comes from a company called Comp Advisory Partners, and definitely worth looking up for some of the things they have to do. Sample in-office compensation remuneration committee meeting agenda. I like this because it gets everyone done and it gets them out of the office in time for lunch. Most of the items I'll mention here tend to be review. Notice how many of them have review in them. This committee doesn't do a lot of actual number crunching. They're looking at the numbers that have been come up with by staff, come up with outside pay plan consultants, comp consultants, information on peer groups. They're looking this information over to see how clean are the numbers, how logical is this, how does it fit together? That's another reason why you need people here who have savvy on compensation planning and structuring to review this properly. Otherwise, they simply won't know the questions to ask. And they're facing more and more due to new demands here. We've covered some of this, touched on it a little bit, but again, you want someone in charge who knows the intricacies and the dealings of setting top executive pay structures, how it works out, what you're going to get if you offer incentives, all of the different stock and equity things, taxes involved, how that's structured, deferral plans. It's very complex. If you look at the compensation agreement that's put together for the leader of a Fortune 1000 company nowadays, it probably has more paperwork and goes into more detail than state budgets did 100 years ago. It's that complex. You need someone who knows that. Company talent policies have landed in the comp committee's domain and is very vital. We're facing some wars for talent nowadays. We're dealing with new technology demands. We're dealing with foreign markets, all sorts of new things that we have to deal with. Do we have the talent for that? Are we developing our own? Are we recognized as an employer that's desirable? Are we losing people? Is your comp committee looking at our turnover numbers specifically to say, are we losing the people we need? And do we have internal policies to retain and develop that? More meetings here. This is something I have found at larger companies, comp committees, even a decade ago, met maybe quarterly. Now we're seeing more and more of that happening 6 times a year, maybe even 8 times a year. And as I mentioned, a lot of that is online, quick or telephonic meetings, quick 15, 20 minutes here or there for an approval. Smarter use of dashboard reports. I wish we had time to go into that. I have a whole program on using online digital information and dashboards to make board information and reporting better here. But this is perfect for it. You want to be able to look at a quick summary, red light, yellow light, green light report on how you're doing on an incentive, on a KPI, all of these things that go into this, instead of having to pile through lots of papers and spreadsheets to find it out. Digital tools let you do that. Better committee orientation and evaluation. This applies for comp, but it applies for all of the committees here. Traditionally, people were rotated to committees not much better than 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, naming them off to wherever they go. No, that doesn't work anymore. You need people with savvy on each of the committees, but you also need to break them in on what's expected of them, how the committee works, the intricacies of what they're doing. You need a good orientation program. That hasn't been done well at the full board level. At the committee level, it's almost been a crime of how little has been done on it. So if I could give you one advice, build a strong committee orientation system. And finally, not listed here, but this is the committee that's taking on not just talent policies, but how diverse those talent policies are. Are women staying in our organization and building their way up through the ranks? Are diverse groups and ethnic groups able to feel that they can succeed and excel here? Are we able to retain them? Do they have problems that we're not dealing with? This is how you find out about it here. If you have a committee, the board is typically, I should say, tied in to the whistleblower system of larger organizations. If you have one, usually the pipeline for whistleblower reporting is the Comp or Remuneration Committee. That's a valuable tool again for this committee. Look at what the reports are. What are the problems? What are the big things? But is there a pattern of smaller things at one location or one facility or with one manager? Very important, very crucial going forward. Nominating and Governance Committee. This is the one that has stretched and transformed itself like nothing over the last couple of decades here. As I said, it started out as a simple group that would get together 15 minutes once a year to put together the slate of directors for election to the board. It's added and added to that. Now it's typically called a Nominating and Governance Committee. Takes on a lot more things here. It's become custodian of the board itself and how well it works. Board evaluation, board update, what it does here, talent search. How did board talent search happen traditionally? You talk to the people who were in the board of directors currently. Joe says that he's going to retire for the board. Joe, do you know anyone who could take your place? Yeah, I know a guy named Pete I serve on another board with. Okay, let's nominate him. Doesn't work anymore. You need to dig in, and this is a committee that's going outside, looking around, finding out what talent is available. They're also putting together job descriptions for board members, which I urge you to do to professionalize things, and at the committee level, and especially job descriptions for committee chairs. Investor relations outreach. This is often the public-facing company or entity of the board of directors. Top priorities, obviously, is still board composition. Here's some good numbers from Spencer Stewart again here. Take a look at them here. But this is valuable because board composition is so basic to what they do, but CEO succession planning, assuring the plan is in place and is working, ESG, all of these other things are crowding into this committee's schedule. As I said, it's become a little bit the kitchen sink of the board of directors. We have a new responsibility in the board. Where do we put it? Let's shove it off onto nominating and governance, which gets back to what I said earlier. I want you to put down and regularly review on paper charters for each of your board committees, divide up the duties, make good sense of it, make sure that things aren't falling between two stools. Leadership skills, the nominating and governance committee, very tricky. This is one of the most diplomatic roles on the board, as you can see here. Independence, broad experience, good emotional intelligence, diplomacy, as I said, meeting, people management skills. It sounds a lot like what you want in an overall chair of the board of directors. And in fact, often the NomGov committee chair will be the board chair because the duties are so similar. In fact, here's a comment I borrowed from the folks at law firm Wachtell Lipton on the qualities that go into this. They put the agenda together, but they have to be able to push back. They have to lead discussion. They have to be able to convince without real power going in. Again, I have a whole section on effective board leadership that covers some of these things here, but it's a very finessed, very emotionally intelligent position. Name your nominating governance committee chair with great care. This sort of takes us around to where we were with ways you can simplify the committee work and make it more effective with board management software. And I really want to touch on some of this. As I said, I was very excited to do this program for Govenda and become affiliated with them because I love what they do. And honestly, all of the people who are doing board portals, you are revolutionizing the board work and governance. As I said, there's the great 30,000 foot level of corporate governance issues, but what really is needed is work at the ground level, what I call boardsmanship. Good committees allow you to cover all of these issues in some good ways. You're going to have to deal with siloed work and gaps and overlaps, which are pretty much the same thing. As I mentioned, good committee charters avoid that. You don't want to have two committees looking at similar aspects of the same issue, like risk. You want it clearly defined on who's looking at what, because otherwise it either will fall between two stools or you'll have both sides thinking that the other side is handling it. It won't work out well. Good leadership of the committees and good ability to do workflow. Committees are valuable in this sense because they allow a board to do what mass production does, if you think about it here. 110 years ago, when the auto industry was taking off, cars were built one-on-one. You'd get a bunch of guys with a wrench in the factory. They'd go to work, build a frame, put the engine together on the spot, build the body, put the wheels on the buggy, whatever it was, and the same team would then shove it out the door to a customer. It was wasteful, it was expensive, it made it a rich man's toy. And then they started to develop precision machining, precision production, which allowed you to break the production down into components, the engine, the bodywork, the chassis, everything could be assembled, put together by experts in it who knew exactly what they were doing, would do it well, and then all of those components would flow together for final assembly. Same thing happens with committees and boards. You have good quality components being done at the committee level. They all flow together at the full board level, so you don't have to redecide decisions. If you have a full board that keeps picking apart things that a committee did, then the committee either isn't doing its job right or the full board isn't doing it. But it also takes on issues like new training and onboarding. You have to know well what you're doing here. Good collaboration, and Margot will touch on this, and the importance of using secured and unsecured channels for messaging, for texting. Everything that you say and do as a board member is legally discoverable. Think about that the next time you send someone a quick voicemail or text message approving something or asking about something on board business. It will have real repercussions. and refreshment. You have a good board now. You have good committees now. 2, 3, 5 years from now, someone's going to retire. You're going to need new skills. How do you deal with that? Are you prepping people? Are you seeking out the talent you want? I've probably run over and I apologize, Margot. I could have gone another, but I'll slap myself on the face and shut up and let you get into delivering the goods here.
That's okay. This is all great information. I am mindful of time and questions, so I am just going to run through some more of this last part of this last section. Then we will jump into questions. And this has all been really great information. So, how could board management help you and your committee? One of the main things about board management software is that it is a secure place for very precious information. Data, intellectual property, and everything is in this fortress. There are certain security certifications and specialties that many of us board management software providers have to give you the utmost security and confidence in what you're doing. So there's also, this becomes a safe place for you to work on committee issues. You can chat in a safe, managed, secure, battle-tested area of the software and get that work done instead of waiting till the next committee meeting or sending emails or, using a chat tool where you're potentially risking, that precious information falling into poor hands. Govenda, we have committee workrooms that are unique to our product where literally the committee as a whole can be in this room and work together. It is a place where you can annotate documents, chat about things, literally work on documents and issues together. And one of the security measures we do when finished, as other board management software platforms will, is to make sure that the drafts are destroyed once the work is done. That's another security measure. It is so critical to having this place that is secure, especially as cyber threats continue to rise, especially over, email and other chat platforms. So next slide, please.
Yeah.
Great. And another way that this type of software helps is it's just got everything in one place, which really saves people time in looking for documents. As Ralph has said, everyone's very busy and there's just no time in sifting through piles and piles of documents, whether they be paper or in Google Doc folders or in Microsoft folders. Nobody wants to do that. So board management software platforms provide you a centralized place to put those documents. At Govenda, we have intelligent search, which basically allows you to search the context within the document and through the whole platform to find certain documents that you need. We also have a part of our AI tool that actually can do some light analysis and even pull basic contents out of documents to provide answers to questions. That's called Ask Gabby. So there's a lot here that can be done. Also, it'll help you to have all your ducks in a row for compliance. There's no searching or emailing people for files or having to look through paper trails. So that is another benefit here. Next slide, please. And then it also helps when you're onboarding new committee members. You've got all of the contents needed for the onboard package in one place, searchable, easy to find, protected, secure. And on a lot of these platforms, including Govenda, you can monitor the engagement of your new committee member and how they're doing when they have completed these necessary papers and materials. So that is, again, another way. And lastly, I think we've got one last one, and then we'll jump into questions. Just adding to what Ralph said about refreshment, data-driven committee refreshment. So you can review member tracks on a role-by-role basis. You can look at that in conjunction with the whole committee structure. It allows you to see really very easily, when terms are expiring, so that then a decision can be made about that refreshment. There's not a lot of guesswork there, having to ask extra questions. So with that, I would like to just thank everyone for being here. Please hold on one more second. If you advance the next slide. I did want to, oh, yep. I did want to just point out before we get into questions, we will be having a Govenda, we have a monthly demo solution showcase that we do, and that is on October 15th. If you want to look at the Govenda product in more depth, so please feel free to join us there. You can go to govenda.com for that. And then I am going to also send you right now a quick poll about this webinar. Please take a second to fill it out. I'm going to launch it this moment. Please fill it out. It will help us to provide better content for you and also for anyone else that's attended. And then Ralph, a question that came up when we were talking about numbers of committees is someone, asked, how do you make sure that you don't have too many committees? Because as you said, this is all getting dumped into some of these other committees, and we've got more and more committees. So how is it possible to regulate that and measure, what is too many committees and what is an applicable committee to add?
Yeah, probably the best way is to start out with the central three committees and then make them justify themselves beyond that. Committee override is typical, but it's usually not seen at smaller or younger companies, because if you have a 6 or 7 member board, having 6 or 7 committees, that's ridiculous. It's the same people, they just shuffle around from seat to seat. So the fewer is better there. And your point about ad hoc committees is good. Never assume a committee has to be important. Maybe the core 3 do, or I should say is eternal here. But why not do it as a one-off? Looking at merger and acquisition strategy. Have this committee come together, look at that, put together a report to the full board, everyone adjourns, the full board can discuss it and decide where to go. It becomes essentially a think tank tool for the board of directors. And you mentioned Gabby, and I'm glad you reminded me. I apologize for not mentioning it, but this is a fantastic capability Govenda has now to use AI tools to help you dig out information, to help on decision making, clarifying thinking. AI in board work that's the next great ocean that we're just waiting to set sail on, and the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is the next big thing. It's an interesting topic for sure, and one that is a whole other webinar. All right, so everyone, if you haven't filled out the poll, please do. We appreciate the feedback. I will leave it up for a little while longer. We're going to wrap up here in just a minute. Ralph, thank you so much for being our guest and for all of this incredible information. It's been really great. For those still with us, we will be sending a follow-up email with all the materials from today, and keep your eyes peeled for another webinar. And with that, we are at time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good one. Yep, bye-bye.